Hey, it's Mike Brennan. We're doing a real special ITC Energy Report. We have the new president of ITC here in Michigan, and we're going to be talking to Chuck Marshall about a lot of things. But we're going to start off with talking about our energy landscape, which is rapidly evolving. Emerging technologies are causing our energy demands to increase, and industry leaders are working to upgrade the grid to support the load growth. Something called MISO's, or is it MISO LRTP Tranche 2.1? Very technical sounding name, but the most recently was approved a portion of the historic transmission plans, which will bring improved reality and urgently needed high voltage transmission lines to our grid. And again, here's Chuck Marshall, who was recently named ITC Michigan president. Let's start off with I interviewed Chuck last year when he was in charge of the whole transmission process, operations, that sort of thing. So let's congratulate you on your new role, Chuck.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm very excited about the new role. A lot of activities here in the state of Michigan, a lot of opportunities, but I've been with ITC about 20 years, 21 years here in a variety of capacities. And so this was sort of a step, at least in my mind, that made a lot of sense, given sort of my background, my experiences. And so happy to embrace it. Yeah, in this role, in this sort of capacity, really looking to provide strategic oversight, sort of active leadership within our Michigan operating companies, within our Michigan business unit, really be a champion of the transmission system, engage with customers, engage with policymakers, a lot of education so they can understand the state of the transmission system here in Michigan, what we're doing to invest in the transmission system, because a lot of it is education and understanding why we need to do the things that we need to do, and the reliability and the value, the benefits that come with forward-looking transmission investment, which I know we're going to talk about today in the context of LRTP, or the Long Range Transmission Plan. I don't know if you wanted me to just a little bit of a primer here on who ITC is, to the extent maybe the audience isn't intimately familiar with ITC, but just quickly, ITC, as you had said, high voltage electric transmission company, independent. And what that means is we operate within a three-part system. The three parts of that system: generation, transmission, distribution. We are the transmission link, that middle link. So we take generation and make that deliverable to our distribution companies here in the state of Michigan. And that's all we do. And we kind of pride ourselves on that. And we have a transmission system here in the state of Michigan that regularly operates really in the top 10% of all transmission systems across North America.
Before we get into, is it pronounced MISO or MISO? I don't want to miss that.
MISO, yes.
MISO. Okay,
MISO,
thanks.
which is the Mid-Continent ISO.
We get into our MISO Tranche 2.1, I'd like to give our listeners some context around this project. Can you tell us about the long range transmission planning process and give a summary of what's happened so far?
Yeah, there's much to be said about the long range transmission planning process. I'll give you kind of a high level overview. So this is the long range transmission plan has been something that's been in development for several years. Really, it goes back to, I would say, 2017, 2018. And there was an acknowledgement by MISO, in just context of what MISO is, the Mid-Continent ISO, is they're, for lack of a better term, the way we think about it, is they're kind of the air traffic control of the transmission system. So they dispatch generation, they sort of operate the transmission system. We own and maintain the transmission system, but we receive signals from MISO. So MISO operates really across a 15-state region, and most of what we're talking about in the context of the long-range transmission plan is really the Midwest, right? So we're talking from the Dakotas to Michigan down to Iowa's really kind of the core states that are impacted by this. But so MISO's assessing, to your intro comments here, our landscape is rapidly changing. And what we know in transmission, it takes a long time to build the infrastructure. And so MISO's like, with the landscape changing, the fleet is changing, the demands of customers and the load is changing, we need to be proactive, not reactive. And so that was really the foundation for the LRTP, is acknowledgement things are changing, and what are we going to do as sort of a united group of transmission owners to ensure the infrastructure is built before customers are demanding that infrastructure. So they've really broken it up into two different tranches, at least initially. There's Tranche 1 projects, and then there's Tranche 2.1 projects. And so what's been done really up to this point in time is Tranche 1 projects have been approved. That was about a $10 billion portfolio of projects that, again, really spanned across that Midwest region. In the state of Michigan, the impact from Tranche 1 is about $850 million worth of infrastructure that we're going to put into the state. That's about 90 miles of new transmission, what we call greenfield. So building transmission lines where transmission lines don't exist today. And then in addition to that, there's about 75 miles of upgrades to our existing system that we have to do as part of Tranche 1. So that was approved summer of 2022.
All right, and then so how does Tranche 2.1 build on the progress made in Tranche 1?
Yeah, so Tranche 2.1, really Tranche 1 kind of set the stage and optimized the system that we had, whereas Tranche 2.1 was an acknowledgement of the existing system, and optimization of that system isn't enough. And so it was, I believe, end of year 2024 that Tranche 2.1 was approved, and that across that Midwest region. So that was 24 projects. That the investment associated with those projects was about $22 billion. From a Michigan perspective, because again, this infrastructure is bigger than just state of Michigan. It's about $2.7 billion worth of infrastructure in Michigan. It's a lot of 345 infrastructure, and we're actually introducing a new voltage to our system, which is 765, which we do not have as ITC here in the state of Michigan, the 765 infrastructure, and we can talk a little bit more about that. So 765 infrastructure, we're building 5 new substations, and that's the impact initially of Tranche 2.1.
So what does Tranche 2.1 do to both address today's transmission needs and prepare us for future energy challenges? Can you explain some of the macro trends driving the need for this improved energy grid?
Yeah, really, this ties back to your opening comments around just our system and our system rapidly changing and evolving. So, the grid holistically, right, has been an aging grid, and I think it's been recognized for decades, really, that we're really living on the infrastructure that was built in the 60s, 70s, maybe a little bit into the 80s, and that's got us a long way, right? And it's sort of the shelf life is largely expired. And so there's a need to upgrade infrastructure across the board in any scenario. But then you add to that, or you couple the fact that generation is rapidly changing. There's been a lot of technological advancements in generation, right? What I think that's important to know. And then the demands placed upon load on our system are changing. So when you kind of think about those, is the transmission system, this legacy transmission system wasn't purposefully designed to meet our future needs. And so what Tranche 2.1 is trying to accomplish is it's forward-looking investment. It's holistic investment, meaning let's not build something the wrong size, like let's right size it. Let's do it the right way one time so we can build the infrastructure so then it'll last for, decades to come, generations to come. So that's the mindset. Build the infrastructure right to serve current needs, future needs, before the needs and the demands are placed upon the system to support the changing landscape on the generation side, on the load side. There's an AI conversation we could have associated with some of that as well. But the one thing that I would really like to highlight, because I think sometimes it's a little bit of a misconception or a misnomer that, well, you're really just building all of this infrastructure for renewable or clean generation. And the reality is yes, that's a part of the story, but it's much more than that, right? It's really about market efficiency. It's about economics. And the economics today would suggest that some of these technologies, solar technologies and wind technologies, have advanced to a point where those are the most cost-effective resources. So we need those resources online because our obligation is we want customers to have access to the lowest cost resources so we can keep their rates as low as we reasonably can. And so when you build the infrastructure that has the ability to connect these new resources, the ability to serve new economic development, economic growth in the state of Michigan, and also the ability to transmit power from the Dakotas into Michigan and Michigan back to the Dakotas based upon need, like that's the infrastructure that we need, the ability to transmit energy on a real-time basis across multiple states. And that's what this 765 kV infrastructure does.
Let's talk a little bit about the various things driving the need for expanded electricity access. Certainly, we have electric vehicles. Everybody and his brother's got 5 or 6 devices that tie into the internet. And again, you guys just provide the power between the utilities, but that's a very important part of it that's driving it. And the other thing that I think we should mention is this is not an overnight thing. We've talked about this before. It takes what number of years for you actually to build this stuff out? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so you're right. Demand is growing. Some of the economic development, the onshoring, that's increasing demands, which is placing a burden on our system. Absolutely, the runway to build these projects is 7+ years, as many as 10 years. In some instances, it even stretches sort of beyond that. And so we don't have the luxury of waiting. We need to be proactive. We need to identify these. And we need to ensure that we maintain the reliability and basically that customers have come to know and sort of expect, right? That's the standard. So when our worlds are changing on both sides, on the load side and the generation side, we need to make sure that we're building the transmission infrastructure that's going to ensure that the customers have the reliable infrastructure and the ability to continue to grow economic development in the state of Michigan and attract more customers.
Yeah, I know the governor would like to see a million EVs plugged into the grid. Um, I don't think the grid can support a million EVs right now. I could be wrong. What do you think?
I think a million EVs would be a challenge. There's no doubt about that. Yeah, EV trends are interesting. I do see personally more and more sort of EVs on the road. I think it's more commonplace. But I think that's something tying this back to Tranche 2.1. One of the differences between Tranche 1 and 2.1 is MISO and the transmission owners collectively had an opportunity with kind of that downtime of 2 years to say, hey, how has the future changed between 2022 and 2024? And what does that look like? What impact are EVs having? What impact is onshoring having? What impact do we anticipate with, additional chip manufacturing and so forth? And so we had an opportunity to take that information and feed that into these Tranche 2.1 projects where, again, you're going to ideally build this infrastructure that's going to better prepare the system to serve EV load growth, onshoring, and other things.
Now, there's been some
Sure.
obviously tariffs. On April 3rd, Trump administration issued a bunch of tariffs, and then the Canadians, in response, in Ontario, have tacked on tariffs and threatened possibly even to cut off electricity. I realize that we have this trade war going on, and it may not be long lived. But what are you doing short term, or can you prepare for such a scenario?
Yeah, no, that's a complex issue there. Tariffs are something that we didn't previously sort of anticipate, but it's the world that we're in today. What I can say concerning tariffs in the state of Michigan is fortunately the way that we plan to serve our load in the state of Michigan. We are not assuming any power is flowing in from Canada. So, in an intentional kind of purposeful way, the way that process works is we have enough domestic resources to serve Michigan load. There are flows on a day-to-day basis that go across our tie lines with Ontario, and so it's generally, economics 101. It's a positive thing to have greater supply, and so if there's an impact on supply, that does have the potential to have an impact on cost and the cost that customers pay. Um, from a Michigan perspective, if you look at the load in the state of Michigan, on balance, it's only 7% of the energy that would be flowing across those tie lines. But I think the majority of that energy actually doesn't serve Michigan customers. It just passes through the state of Michigan and serves customers outside of the state of Michigan. And so, from a tariff perspective, does it have the potential to impacting supply? Yes. Do I think it's going to be meaningful in terms of impacting the reliability in the grid and have a significant impact on cost in the state of Michigan? I do not. Not at
Uh,
least not in the near term.
you mentioned Tranche 2.1 will tie into an existing network of 765 kV transmission lines. Why do we need 765 kV lines, and do we already have them within Michigan's footprint?
Yeah, 765 is something I think internally we're excited about. So ITC today, we do not have any transmission assets that operate at that voltage, 765. The significance why this is relevant, right, is really what it can do and how much power it can carry. So in the state of Michigan today, the highest voltage that we operate is 345. So when you go from 345 to 765, what you effectively do is have 6 times the carrying capability or transfer capability. So you otherwise, if you didn't use 765, you would need 6 345 kV lines. So tying this back to the long range transmission plan, sort of the intent and the objectives, what we hope to accomplish with this, a lot of it is transfer capability, the ability to push power, as I said before, long distances from sort of the east to the west and the west to the east. And when you do that with 765, again, you have effectively a bigger pipeline, so greater transfer capability, and then you minimize the impact on landowners, right? As opposed to building 6 lines, you're only building 1 line. So, yes, this is something that we're actively pursuing. Kind of refining internally our design standards and other things like that. But there is a small amount of 765 in the state. It's in the southwest corner. It's not owned by ITC, but the ability to plug into that existing 765 network and then build out an extensive 765 kV network across MISO will provide Michigan customers, Michigan residents, access to more competitive energy and a more reliable transmission system.
And certainly a lot more electricity, right? Again, getting
Yes,
back to 1 line versus 6,
yes,
and yeah, that'll make the farmers happy too. You guys won't be out there in the fields putting in more towers, more lines, that sort of thing, right?
that would be great. Yes,
Okay,
yes.
cool. All right, so Chuck, then if folks want to get more information about ITC Michigan and of course the parent company ITC Holdings, how do they do that?
So they certainly can go to our website. There's a lot of information on our website that describes who we are. In addition to that, there's portions of our ITC Michigan website where there's project profiles, so they can understand some of the projects that we're doing and the reason for that, the need driver, and then what impact we anticipate that's going to have potentially in their local communities.
All right, Chuck Marshall, president of ITC Michigan and vice president of ITC Holdings Corp. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.